Jon, please share with us how your team uses ProtoPie for high-fidelity prototyping and user research as well. I will stop share so you can share your screen.
Hi, great. Let me set this up.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you can see the presentation, but also the web browser as well. But it takes up the screen. Nothing else is showing. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, hello, ProtoPie community. And by the way, I just want to take a step back and just say, Maya, and Sam, that stuff is so cool. It was really, really awesome to see that. And I love the interactions and the whole process. So thanks for showing. I just want to say hello, ProtoPie community. I'm really happy to be here. And as I said before, good morning to you all, or good afternoon, or good evening. It really depends on where you are. And this presentation is about how and why designers at Meta are beginning to use ProtoPie. My name is Jon Bernbach. I'm a product designer at Meta, and I work on a team called Internal Design Tools. And mainly we design and build digital tools to help product and content designers do their jobs at scale. So this includes prototyping tools as well as plugins for Figma, etc. Here's an outline for this deck. First, I just want to talk about the background of this whole effort of how it came to be that we are starting to pilot ProtoPie. Then I'm going to go into the reasoning why we chose to use this tool and some of our initial findings. And last, I want to talk about next steps and what they could look like. And I also want to caveat that I'll be keeping a lot of these details broad and high level since this is a public engagement. Okay, great. So the first thing I want to do, as I mentioned before, is discuss the background for how we got here in the first place. Now, some of you may have heard the term shift left when it comes to product development. Shift left is a term we use to define the efforts teams put into getting quality right before development. As you may have guessed, everything to the right of development or the right of implementation or going public with whatever it is that you're doing, an app or a website, things can get very expensive in terms of development time and engineers. So the whole idea is to keep quality to the left and trying to call out mistakes or issues that you have before you get to that stage. And shifting left is a big part of what we're trying to get teams to do more of. And this means things like strictly adhering to the design systems and components that we have, as well as using correct colors and following accessibility heuristics. But of course, what I'm talking about here on my part is this means that we're asking teams to do a lot of prototyping and user researching, and we need to provide them with the right tools to do that. So why do we think prototyping design is so important and vital? And I'm sure a lot of this will resonate with you. We think that prototyping up-levels quality in 3 areas. And the first area is communicating design experiences. In essence, this means prototyping, especially new experiences, increases the team's velocity or their cadence by reducing miscommunications that can occur when presenting only static mock-ups. Reviewing prototypes also helps teams make more informed and strategic decisions and really sort of align on what's happening so they don't have to sort of guess or make assumptions, again, based on static mocks that a lot of teams actually wind up using in reviews. So the next area is unblocking design research. This is all about quality improvements. A team can gain when they execute user testing with prototypes. So research with prototypes drastically improves usability gains with each round of testing. It also helps eliminate bad ideas, and a team doesn't need to rely on A/B experimentation that's done after implementation. This is a very popular and common practice with technology, especially at big tech companies, where they actually will implement a couple of options and then do A/B testing. And unfortunately, some of those, even the A and the B, may not be the correct solution to a problem. So again, keeping things to the left really helps mitigate a lot of these instances. And the last one is improves product quality. This is all about shifting interaction design and decision-making into the hands of designers rather than depending on engineers to sort of fill in the blanks. Okay, so we know prototyping can help up-level quality, but designers haven't been including much of it in their design process. According to our research, we uncovered that prototyping tools have been adopted by less than a very specific amount of designers here at Meta. It's not a great number, and I don't want to share it just for like reasons, but it really drove us to take next steps and try and solve this like major problem. The number that we came to is significant because when a team doesn't incorporate iterative designing or iterative prototyping and research into their product cycle, the result tends to be that we ship lower experiences. And this is something that we want to correct. As I mentioned before, correcting does take resources and money to fix. So it all leads to the idea and methodology of doing research with prototypes. Okay. All right, so the problem has been we need designers to create more mid-complexity prototypes, but designers have voiced their frustration with the accessibility gap between our prototyping tools. And let me just take a sip of water. So we use Figma, Origami, and Framer at Meta. Figma is great for low complexity prototyping, but as you all probably know, it's limited in what it can do. And there are security risks that we have with Figma when it comes to test participants using prototypes and outside of Meta, as well as a lot of like onboarding obstacles just to view our prototypes. Tools like Framer and our own tool, Origami Studio, which we build in-house at Meta, are absolutely amazing, and they're high for high complexity prototyping. The challenge, unfortunately, has been the difficulty in learning how to use these tools. And then unfortunately, it's frustrated and often deter many designers from prototyping. So what I did is I conducted a tools analysis to better understand the current prototyping marketplace, as you would. And our goal was to determine if there was a prototyping app that could help bridge the tool gap for our designers, or maybe we even build one ourselves. I assessed 13 different tools and their features, and there are a lot of wonderful tools out there in the marketplace, but ProtoPie stood out as the tool that most aligned with the feature needs of the most common product designer and UXR researcher or UX researcher at Meta. And I'm going to speak to these features in the next section. Okay, so we found ProtoPie to be a great tool for anyone who wants to prototype realistic animations, interactions, transitions that are not within Figma's capabilities and sometimes difficult to figure out how to do in tools like Origami Studio or Framer. To me, ProtoPie feels super ideal for prototyping experiences seen in mobile apps, but also being able to use ProtoPie Connect, which is the companion app that ProtoPie uses to connect to like hardware. So being able to use ProtoPie Connect, we can and have been prototyping with external hardwares like the Oculus headsets and smartwatches and other Internet of Things in our reality labs. And there are some cool opportunities within those spaces that I'll talk a little bit about further in this deck. Okay, so when looking, we did have a bunch of principles that were sort of like guiding North Stars or our guiding principles of when we were auditing tools. The first one is ProtoPie's mental model on using is easy to grasp. And there are a number of free and pay educational resources found online. This was like a huge factor in choosing to go with ProtoPie. We also are looking for a tool that designers can learn relatively quickly and feel excited about using. And it's extremely important because if we chose a tool that had every capability under the sun, but was not accessible to designers, then we would simply just see low adoption and our problems of filling a tool gap or bridging that tool gap would not be solved. We'd be exactly where we are before piloting a new tool. The second is ProtoPie is a no-code prototyping tool. This is a great thing that ProtoPie doesn't have any sort of like coding. I would call formulas really like little mini expressions, but because coding is something that we think is not something that a product designer is has to do, and we feel that, like, based on our own research, coding is like a deal breaker. I spoke to a lot of designers in Meta and outside of Meta, and a lot of this like refers to Framer, and Framer has low adoption numbers because of like the high intensity coding aspect to it when doing very complex or mid-level complex things. So that was a huge aspect, is like having no code. Also, being able to share prototypes with test participants outside of Meta securely and through web browsers is like a huge table stakes thing that we needed. And also, it's awesome to have that native Android and iOS previewer apps. And the last thing is that we think ProtoPie has found that sweet spot of being a powerful interaction design tool that's relatively easy to adopt, and it's considered nearly as powerful as Origami Studio and Framer. I probably all have seen this interface, but ProtoPie's modern interface follows a lot of familiar design patterns that designers are and have been able to grasp quite easily. And there's plenty to say about ProtoPie's capabilities, and I suspect many of you are well aware of what ProtoPie is capable of, but I'll point out a few things that were must-have for us. First is non-variant prototyping. I was trying to avoid a tool where designers had to design everything rather than sort of instructing ProtoPie what to do with requirements. So when I mean like variant prototyping, this is really a little bit of, well, it's actually what Figma does, or something like Principle, where you have to design everything out to sort of explain what the before and the after state is. And by taking that out of the equation, you're able to accomplish a lot more without having to design a lot of screens and really hacking your way to a prototype. The next thing is prototypes need to be able to work with both web browsers and native apps. Web browsers in the current remote research environment it's vital. Test participants really don't do a lot of downloading apps. They just want to go onto a website and just start looking at a prototype. So this is a much simpler world for UX researchers when doing their testing sessions. ProtoPie uses real text and real keyboards. That's a big deal to us. Conditions, formulas, and variables. These features give designers the ability to realistically prototype anything beyond what you can do in Figma. And the ability to create and share components, it's a huge part of it. And the components also can be like unique. So for example, I could have a bunch of radio buttons, and each one of them is very unique. And I can have different outcomes when clicking on certain radio buttons or certain checkboxes. So that's very powerful to us. Another must-have was access to device sensors and hardware, especially camera. Camera, video, and audio are major tools for how people create social media content and, of course, consume it. So with that, I'm really hoping ProtoPie pushes camera audio even further, because it's really everything where we're leaning into is all about like video and camera. So now that we're using ProtoPie, we're actually piloting. I can chat about the things that are happening at the company amongst the people that are a part of the pilot, and I'll discuss a little bit about like what we're learning as the pilot of using ProtoPie is happening. It's ongoing. So we're a little over 3 months into piloting ProtoPie, and there was a lot of work to get this up and running at a large company like Meta. A few items include SSO implementation. We had to create a bunch of presentations to promote the tool. We had workshops, lunch and learns. We had to get designers ramped up with education material, so we had to figure out that, and troubleshooting and helping folks along the way, which is very interesting because a lot of people aren't using ProtoPie, so we only had a certain amount of like experts. So some people were learning quite fast and then sort of jumping in and helping others get ramped up. So that was a quite interesting thing. And then on top of it, we also had to work with researchers separately, as they're a whole different separate user group. So telling them how to navigate ProtoPie's cloud account, how to set up a prototype so it's secure, and what is the process for being sure a test participant can never engage with that prototype after a research session. These are all things that we need to be sure of. So with any tool that we would have piloted, we had two main questions to solve for. The first question is, can we fill the mid-complexity prototyping gap that we had at the start of this presentation deck? And can we identify a prototyping tool that UXRs can use to research more often? Okay, so we had to recognize that learning a new tool will always be a challenge for most, especially at a fast-paced development environment. However, early engagement signals are overwhelmingly positive, and let's talk about that next. Okay, so I'm happy to say that feedback and metrics are really positive, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting results that I personally didn't consider everything. So that's pretty cool when you discover something and you really didn't account for it when you went into the project. We've been seeing a lot of significant engagement. That's totally awesome. Prototypes that are actually being used in reviews as well as research. And that was something that we were surprised to see happening so quickly, because you have to remember, designers are also learning this new tool. So to see them actually using it, quickly ramping up somehow, and then using it in their reviews for new ideas or using it in research sessions, that's like a really big deal. And it gives us a lot of positive validation. Prototypes, I was happy to see that designers were advocating and evangelizing the tool on their own teams. This is something that was interesting because I would only find out after the fact, or when a designer reaches out to me for some presentation deck or advice. So what I'm saying here is, if I didn't explain it well, there are designers who I'm not aware of that are on the pilot, and then they're going to use ProtoPie, learning it, finding out that it actually is fitting the needs of their team, and then having little micro workshops amongst their team members. And you have to understand, Meta is large, and I don't know everything that's going on everybody's team. So it's very interesting to find that those organic things are happening outside of the pilot program. And something that was super cool to see was how this tool could be or fit nicely into the VR experience team's workflow. This is the team that works on things like the Oculus headset and the hand controllers. And I will talk about that right now. This is interesting because designers are, for the VR engagement, are exploring how to prototype 2D experiences to test inside headsets. So right now, designers are simulating two-dimensional experiences. And I can't show the video of the prototype in action, I'm sorry, but I hope these screen grabs can illustrate the general look and feel of an early prototype that a lead VR designer used to explore and find ways to make ProtoPie their go-to tool for 2D experiences. In this prototype, it's like of a media player. The designer used a bunch of variables and formulas and some other sophisticated interactions to make this happen. And what was really cool about this is that the designer learned, it was an advanced designer, but he learned ProtoPie in a couple of days. And by the end of the week, he was prototyping quite advanced stuff, which is testimony to it's the general or relative ease of learning ProtoPie. What really stood out as a big opportunity for making, what stood out is that there's an opportunity for making ProtoPie the go-to tool for this team. I'm trying to express what they did is they used the ProtoPie extension app to actually get the prototype inside of the headset. And this is like a really big deal because having done this, the designer is actually learning that this increases the team's velocity, increases their production velocities. And since the prototyping can be done without a design engineer. So just to take a step back, when you prototype for the Oculus headset, you need to rely on design engineers who understand how to use a design tool, or not a design tool, a prototyping tool called Unity Pro. So what they're able to do with two-dimensional prototyping is the designers are able to do that themselves without having to wait around for an engineer to come help them with complex tools like Unity. Here's a photo showing what ProtoPie's Android previewer running inside the Oculus headset looks like. The issue right now is that the app floats in space. So when you do run a prototype, it does take up a lot more space in the headset, but it doesn't take up the whole viewport. So what we're looking to do and what's happening right now is that a bunch of designers from the VR team are working with ProtoPie to actually make this a fully immersive experience, which will be quote unquote like more native. Okay, so how do we see the future? Well, I believe the future looks really bright for ProtoPie. In the current market, I'd say that they found the sweet spot for being a prototyping tool and that a designer uses when Figma simply won't do. And if it's not happening already, I believe that a lot of large companies will start working with ProtoPie to get their designers ramped up using the tool. I'm sure that every company has a wish list for ProtoPie. I'm absolutely sure of it, but here are a few items that I've been hearing from our designers during this pilot. And a lot of it really leans to enhancing features that have to do with the camera, video, and sound. And this also includes the AR, and a dream would be getting the 3D stuff involved, because we are living in a world now where people can scrub a mobile screen and actually see like a product or an avatar rotate in 3D. And especially as we're leaning into more of those avatars and that sort of AR experience, we really would love to see more of those like feature sets blown out or even created from scratch. Okay, thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions that aren't answered here, you can feel free to write me on LinkedIn, and I will be happy to answer anything that I can.
Thank you so much, Jon. This was an awesome presentation. I enjoyed it. Now let's see some of the questions that our audience has for you today. Okay, let me open the Q&A. Okay, let's see. Philip is asking, how do you compensate the missing patch components functionality of origami and ProtoPie to reuse layer-independent interactions / animations?
You might have to ask that one more time because I'm trying to get my head wrapped around that.
If you click on the Q&A, you will be able to see it yourself. So it's the second question from Philip Nuremberg.
How do I compensate the missing patch components functionality of Origami Pi to reuse layer independent interactions animations? I am so sorry that I'm missing some of that, or I'm not able to follow it. I'm just gonna have to hope that I tackle some of what the Philip is asking, but there are things that ProtoPie simply just can't achieve that Origami can. Origami with all their patches and the engineering that went into it can get very close, if not real, like 100% to what is in production. So there are things like that you can do with like mathematics and like gravity effects and stuff that ProtoPie simply can't do. And so I think at that point, a designer has to have made a decision of what tool maybe that they rely on. I'm not sure how to answer that. Philip, if you write me on LinkedIn, I could try and find somebody that is a origami expert, but also using ProtoPie, and maybe can like answer that better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jon. Someone is asking, so you're mentioning that you're trying out the tool. What is the level of full adoption beyond initially trialing it? Meaning full adoption of ProtoPie in teams.
What I personally like from the metrics, and I think the adoption is really, it's really powerful. I'd be surprised if it wasn't like the real go-to tool for mid to high complexity prototyping. The adoption is significant in comparison to tools like origami, for example. It's very favorable. There's a lot of great sentiment around it, and it's actually being used, and we have metrics on that, but it's not really a tool that you can measure against something like Figma. ProtoPie is a tool that's for like very like deep sort of like usage, maybe like once a month, like 1 week out of a month or two, when teams are really getting involved in prototyping. But Figma is always going to be that sort of go-to tool for like designing really fast and prototyping very high level click-throughs. But yes, in general, the adoption is incredible.
Awesome. That's great to hear. It's not related to so Tabang is asking, what's the font you use on your deck? You can share.
It's a Google font called Poppins.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay.
It's probably the easiest question I can answer.
No, you're doing a great job, Jon. Okay, I would really like to go over this question. What's the general feedback from the development team when you hand off the interactions made with ProtoPie?
So this is also another interesting question. I haven't been focusing on handoff too much. This is something, again, we have to like really consider this. This also, one of the things that I did write on my, like, I wish this would, ProtoPie would have, this feature is the ability to save animation values. Because Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, they all have their set values, their ease in, ease out curves, and with the duration and this and that. And the idea is like, the engineers shouldn't, they know they have their components, and they shouldn't be just creating animation values out of the blue based on like what they're seeing. So you as a designer should be animating values correctly, because we have all these predefined components. If you're doing something new, which is what's maybe being asked, is that you can make a recipe and hand it to an engineer and maybe explain like what the layers are and everything. Or you could actually use the interaction recipe to actually take the values and like write it out into a document. Personally, I'm working on an app for origami, and I used these ProtoPie, the recipe for the first time, gave it to an engineer, and she was like blown away and excited that like she had something to like work off of and not like have to like sit there and like kind of guesswork it. So it does work. It was quite cool. I'm not sure how it works at scale, and I think that this is something that we're going to have to work out systems as we go full tilt with ProtoPie. I guess the next phase.
Awesome. Thanks, Jon. Another question, this time related more to UX research from Kang Wei. In terms of UX research for ProtoPie, are there any differences between researching on static screens as opposed to animations?
Well, in general, the way I see it, and I think a lot of people would also see it, is that static screens, especially in research, it's one thing to talk your team members through, but static screens, you have no idea what's happening between the states. In fact, what that means is that you're relying on the participant to sort of like fill in the gaps. And that's a huge endeavor or a huge responsibility that you're giving to a test participant. Interaction design and motion design is like, it's just 100% like an absolute for UX research when it comes to like flows. You have to really understand where you were and where you're going and how you got there to really give good data back to that researcher. And the fact is even if you wanted to test with flat screens, you still need to have a vehicle to get those flat screens into the test participants' hands. So if I'm a researcher in New York City and I'm testing with somebody in London, I need them to have an app or have access to a website or a web URL to see those screens, and it has to be secure. And so ultimately we have to use something like ProtoPie's cloud account, so we can like share prototypes. Even if they are flat screens, it's still something, it's a prototype that you have to put into into a web browser or the native previewer app. So to me, your UX researcher has to decide what the prototype will look like, whether it's flat screens that you can just click through or a motion design. But ultimately, the way I see it is we have to have a secure way to share those intellectual properties.
Thank you so much. There are many more questions, but just because we're approaching the end of the webinar, we have time for one more question for all of our speakers from Jon, Mia, and Sam. So Carlo is asking, did you use any other prototyping tools in the past? Is there anything you're missing from past experiences with them?
And I'm going to try and answer one question from an anonymous person in this, which is also, what is the reason for not going to origami straight away for prototyping? I'll try and combine the two. I've used things like Principle and Flinto in the past, and of course, Figma. They are super easy because you can quickly design very fast, but it's a very sort of prescriptive way of how to get from point A to point B that you have to have the participant do. And once you start designing on a very sophisticated level, like you would with origami or ProtoPie, you're really like defining, you can define like error states, you can define a lot of different things based on what the user is doing. So you can get a lot better research signal. I used origami in the beginning. Origami is wonderful, but it only runs on an iPhone. That's it. It doesn't run through a web browser. So if I'm testing with somebody in some like emerging market, maybe in India or Brazil, I can't test with them because nobody has a $1,000 iPhone out there. It's all Android. And also, as I mentioned before, we need designers to use the tool to prototype. So if they're just not understanding the complexities of how to use origami, then it's just a moot conversation. They're not doing any prototyping because a lot of people will just give up. They're just going to use Figma and try and figure it out, or Keynote. And that's not what we want them to do. We want them to prototype agnostic to the tool and whatever it takes. And if it takes a tool like ProtoPie, then that's great. We will always have these rock star prototypers at Meta that use origami that are doing like outrageous things that you can easily see on Twitter or in the apps. But ProtoPie, I think, is really getting close to that kind of level.
Thank you so much. Mia and Sam, would you like to chip in with your experience?
I'll chip in a little bit just because it's one of the reasons, the exact reason why we got it over a year and a half ago now. And it was, we played around with some of the ones that Jon had been saying. You know, some of them are more like code-based and a little bit more difficult. Obviously, this one's very, very simple to use. But fundamentally, a lot of the ones that we had looked at, or pretty much all of them, it might have changed now, they didn't have any much functionality for playing videos with inside them. So what we do, right, we work on streaming apps within this company, and fundamentally that's what our products do. They play video, amongst other things. And we obviously needed a way to interact with video. So like if we're designing a video player, we need to be able to put a video, an example in there, be able to turn it on and off, press play, mute it, all those things. And a lot of the ones at the time just didn't have that functionality. So like this was the one because it was the only one that could do what we wanted to show.
Thank you so much. Okay.